When you have a software as a service business, as a data team, you have two areas that you definitely have to cover. So the one is obvious. These are the subscription, because this is your monetary foundation. If this works, your business works. And so it gives you an indicator about the financial healthiness of your company, at least like from the revenue side. The second area is the product performance. And product performance is your product actually working for your users? And of course, both go hand in hand. So in an ideal world, your software is providing really good value to your users, and they are willing to create a subscription and keep this subscription over years and years to come. So the product side can give you early indication about the potentials that can end up in subscriptions. This is why both combined are extremely powerful in analyzing software as a service. But to get the data for this and to combine the data is often not really straightforward. In this series, I want to show how to create a setup that can give you subscription data that you maybe already have in your data warehouse, and on the other hand, the behavioral product data, and then bring it together in Mixpanel to create these analyses where you can see how people starting to get value from your product, and then to see the impact on the subscriptions so that you can understand when we increase product adoption, we can see this kind of impact on our MRR, on our subscription revenue. So in this episode 1, we don't really make our hands dirty, and we will just look at how the architecture looks like, how the approach looks like, and so what we will cover in the next videos. So this is the introduction and the whole topic. I think it's still worth to watch because it gives you an idea how you can set this, what is important, what are things you have to consider. And then in the next episodes, we actually really go deep down into it. And so we will work with the data in data warehouse, we will prep the data there, and then we will see how we can get it into Mixpanel. Then we will see how we can combine it with the existing behavioral data. And then, of course, we will work with the data. So we will really see, okay, how we can combine these two data types and then create the kind of analysis that we want to have. So join me now. Make sure that you subscribe because there are more episodes coming in the next weeks. So don't miss out to subscribe so that you can get a notification once the next episode is online. So you can follow me on this very interesting journey to combine subscription data and product data. This video is sponsored by Mixpanel. Mixpanel has a new way to do product analytics with your warehouse data. You can connect Mixpanel to your data warehouse, and then you can run all the product analytics investigations and all the product analytics deep dives on top of your data warehouse data with clean, prepared, and high quality data. Check out the link in the description to learn more about the offering. I'm using it and I'm extremely happy to have this new kind of setup for product analytics because it unlocks so many more use cases on top of much better data than before. Let's start with some context. So let's start to paint our picture how we want to get there. As I said, subscription and product analytics, when you have software as a service, definitely should go hand in hand, but they are often isolated. You often have one thing where we can say subscription analytics, which there are different ways how this can happen. There are standalone tools, for example, where you can connect your Stripe data, connect it to the tool, and then you get dashboards with the classic software as a service metrics, and which is a good first step, but the problem is like you have another world living next to it, and let's call this product analytics. These two are deeply intertwined because when your product is not working, your subscription will not work. And if your subscription will not work, then you're missing the money to improve your product. These are really deeply entangled, but they are often not really combined in data setups. As said, like subscription, you either use, let's say, a tool, or what I also often see is you pull the data into your data warehouse, and then you create classic reports about typical subscription performance. So you will calculate how the MRR looks like, how it's developing, what is new MRR, what is retained MRR, what is expansion, contraction, churned. So the typical MRR metrics. And in the most setups that I know, is something that often happens in your data warehouse. So you pull the data in your data warehouse, and so we will have a look into this in a second. You pull the data in your data warehouse, and then you model the data, and then you create specific kind of reports for this. The product analytics part, at least like until today, so this might change in the future where you also like source more events in the data warehouse, but in most of the setups that I work with today, it's usually like in an analytics tool. And we will do everything here with Mixpanel, so we can already write it down. There's not really a connection between these both. And there are different ways how to approach this. Of course, I could take the behavioral data, which I have in Mixpanel, and can then bring it into my data warehouse. I think this is like something that some companies already do. And it's an obvious first choice because you already model stuff in your data warehouse. And so in the end, then the behavioral data from Mixpanel is just another data source that you basically add here. The problem with this approach is, so let's say load Mixpanel in data warehouse. The problem with this approach is what you want to do with the data afterwards. If your goal is just to enhance some metrics on your metric dashboards to have it next to your subscription revenue, then it works. So if you want to have, okay, how many active users did we have? If you maybe you have an enhanced product analytics setup, and so you know, for example, like how many users have experienced their first value in your product. So maybe you can get some of this data out there, and so you can create these isolated metrics. How far do isolated metrics get you? Not so far. You can remember, so I did the session with Arby, and I will link it, where we were looking into metrics trees. And metric trees basically already explains there's a relation between different kind of metrics. So your whole business is built on relations. So specific actions and specific teams create something else in a different part of your application. And so all these things are connected. And when we go this approach, the things are not really connected. It's more like the only connection is like the time period. So you look at the same numbers for the same months, but it's not really like this data really works together. And this is something that at least it doesn't make me happy. I want to create sequence analysis. And so let's make this a little bit different here. I hope this is not too confusing. So in the end, load subscription into Mixpanel. So this is something that is not so commonly used, and it's not around for such a long time. I can take all the subscription data that I have and I can load it into Mixpanel. The first requirement to do this is the subscription data has to be in an event form because Mixpanel is an event-based system. So I have to transfer my subscription data into events. Luckily, this is not really hard because in the end, subscription is events. So subscription is created, it's renewed. As I said, it's expanded, contracted, and so on. So we can derive a lot of events from the subscription data. The challenge that we have, and we will cover in the next video, is like when we already have subscription data loaded, for example, by Fivetran, and it's not in event form as it comes into our data warehouse, how we can bring it into event form. So I usually call this Eventify. And so the big question is like, how can we eventify this ripe data? But once we have it in event data, and we have the same identifier, so we have to have the account ID, user ID, or customer ID, then we can bring it up into Mixpanel, and then we can combine it with the analytical data or with the product analytics data. And this makes it interesting because this enables something which I like to work a lot, and which is basically called sequence analysis. And it's a very, very abstract term, but what does it mean? It means for a single user, I can analyze all the different kind of steps that this user or account has been done over the history, or maybe over the last 2 or 3 years, in the right kind of order. And when I aggregate this up, I can see this interesting pattern. So I can create funnels based on that. So I can see a funnel like, make a basic funnel like someone creates an account, does the onboarding, gets the first value, and then creates a subscription. So I can create this funnel to get a first idea, for example, how long is the time span to create the subscription, and I can then break it down by different kind of information about these users and accounts, for example, by industry, by marketing source. And so I can see, does this value of, let's say, time until someone creates a subscription, does it vary? And also like the conversion rates. If we see, okay, we get people into a valuable experience, first experience, to really analyze for which kind of segments this works really great. So they convert on a higher conversion rate into a subscription. But maybe there are segments where it doesn't really work, which is interesting for us because this is the opportunities we are looking for. And so this makes it powerful. And this is something that sequence analysis enables, because sequence analysis in the end is a lot about exploration. And this makes it different to classical BI structures. So BI is often, it's static. It has to be static because like you want to have these reports that you want to share with your investors, with the management, where they can really looking back on the different kind of months, how the performance was. But this is what you can do. So you can drill down a little bit. Usually like you have some possibilities to drill down this report, but it's limited. But it's limited by design because this is how you build BI systems. In product analytics or sequence analysis, you take a different approach. It's much more exploration. You start with an initial thought, with an initial question. For example, like, how can we get more people from having the first value experience to a subscription? And this is pretty unknown. So it's basically like you're setting sail on an ocean where you have no idea where you go to. And so then you start to explore. So you go in different kind of direction, as I said. So you start to break down by specific kind of properties like marketing source, like industry, because you ask for industry in the onboarding. And so by that, you figure out which are combinations of properties of users that are interesting for you. And so there could be, of course, as said, there can be two interesting things. So one, which are really performing really well. So this could be a blueprint for you to learn. Why does it work for them so well? Or you find the ones which are underperforming, where you can then figure out, okay, what is missing for them? Maybe do they need a different approach when they start out with the product? But this is the thing that you only understand by exploration. And this makes it so different. And this is like why I want to create a setup where we do exactly this. So we don't do the classic way that we load the Mixpanel data in our data warehouse. No, I want to have the subscription data that we already have in our data warehouse into Mixpanel. And so Mixpanel now has different ways to do this, and we will check them over the course of the series. But these ways to do this are now enabling me to basically pull any kind of data into Mixpanel as well, as long as I bring them into event data. And this in the end is like what we will do in this series. Let me sketch it out. Today, we explain a little bit where we want to get to. For us, like the first step is basically Eventify Stripe data. We will have a Stripe data set. It's a simulated data set, but it's still pretty close to the real Stripe data set that we load via Fivetran. And so we pick the data, how it comes from Fivetran, and I will show you, even when it doesn't look like event data, that there's actually a lot of event data in there, and we can pull it out. So this is what I call Eventify. So we will Eventify Stripe data. So this is our first step. So the next step is we load and sync the data in Mixpanel. So we will show how this works. Then we basically will combine product and subscription data in Mixpanel. And then we will create some, let's say, some foundational metrics. So we will create the same kind of metrics that you usually also create in the other tools. So we will show how to do this in Mixpanel because it's also possible to do it here. And then, of course, in the end, we do the thing that we already have here. So we will explore insightful sequences to really figure out, okay, we can understand funnels, we can understand retention, where we combine these two data points. This is what we do. So this is the outline of the series. And I hope you get the idea why I take this kind of approach, what I'm aiming for to get there. And I hope if you have a similar kind of setup, so you already have Stripe in your data warehouse and you're already using Mixpanel, that you might even follow along and say, okay, this is something we want to try out as well, so that you can prepare your Stripe data and then get it into Mixpanel and then combine it with the other data, because I hope you in the end will understand what kind of interesting use cases this will unlock for you. Oh, but stop. Before we totally go off here with technical implementation, we shouldn't forget our insights. Let me put my insert shirt on. Voila, I already have it. It's super important to see how we do this technically, but in the end, we want to achieve something which is really useful for our business. And I haven't mentioned this yet, so let's do that. If you have watched my webinar with Arbi, this might be familiar to you because this is what he presented there. So this is his board where he has, let me zoom out, where he's all the different kind of levels, how you can work, coming from classic subscription revenue, like total ARR, total MRR, and then you break it down into different kind of aspects like new MRR, expansion MRR, and so on. So check it out. I will put a link into the show notes where you can find it. So this is great. This is like where we want to end up too. This was also like the reason why I was sitting down with Abi in the first place, to get an idea. How can we do something, how we can build a setup that enables us to understand our business and our product performance a lot better. Speaking about business and product, this is the essential thing that we want to solve here. So let me switch. I prepared something where we want to get to. This is a much simplified version. So Avi's example is vast, so in the end you might end up with something that Avi has designed, but I like to start in a small version of it. And the important thing is what I want to show you now is like where business starts, where product starts, and where both of them basically go hand in hand, because this is something we can represent here. So what you see here in the top, this is basically the same thing that we just saw on the other board. So this is classic breakdown of total MRRs. Here, I make it a little bit simpler. I just go for new, retain, and churn. And then there are different aspects that drive new subscriptions and different aspects that drive MRRs. For me, the interesting part starts from here. So let me put a line in here, because this here are classic subscription metrics. This is the things that we can get out of Stripe data. And what we see here below are classic product metrics. What we see below, these are classic product metrics. And so we can get this, for example, from Mixpanel. In most setups, these worlds are totally isolated. So we cannot point these arrows from here to here or from here to here, because we don't really have a connection between. So these are isolated metrics. The interesting thing is, like, when we now bring everything together, we can connect these two. Why can we connect them? Because in the end, we have information about what kind of account has this subscription, and then we have information what this account is doing in our product. By this information, we can bring both together, and we can basically run then behavioral analysis of things that happening here, how they impact, let's say, the revenue stream that we have up here. So in the end, we can look into something, okay, do we have subscriptions at risk? Which means we can define criteria where we think a subscription is at risk. So when we start easy, it's okay, people don't really interact with our tools anymore, but they still have a subscription. These are definitely candidates that will churn at any point, because at some point they recognize, hey, I always get this email where they tell me I just charged your credit card with X, Y, that. I don't use it anymore, so why should I do it? So they will churn. And this is something where we can bring product behavioral data and connect it to our subscription data. And so we can even see like how big this pool of potential risk is, and so how many of them basically then churn out. And the nice thing is in the final step, we can then even take the step and can use this combination of this data. So just let me show this quick. So this is basically the Stripe data that we have. This is the Mixpanel data that we have. And again, so I explained it a little bit before. So we want to bring this all together into Mixpanel, because then we can basically build the sequence of activities and events, and also the relationship between these different kind of metrics a lot better than if we would just get the Mixpanel data into the Stripe data. Another benefit of this whole thing is like where we want to end up, and this is always like where I want to end up with these things. I want to enable teams to do things. For example, when we develop this and when we have an insight and when we know, for example, look, we have 1,000 accounts which are at risk to churn as subscriptions. We know from the data and from the analysis, we know we currently from these accounts, we have a churn rate of, let's say, 7-8%. And we know that the average time to become an account at risk and to churn is around 2 to 2.5 months average time. With this information, we can go to the customer success team or to the growth team and can ask them to run activation campaigns or other activation initiatives. It could also be like that the product team is reaching out to these kind of people and asking them, okay, what's the problem? Where can we help? What can we do? But this makes it actionable. From Mixpanel, we can sync up the data into other systems to then enable these kind of teams to do this kind of work. And the same thing on the other side. So we can see here, look, we have this different kind of accounts without subscription, but maybe, for example, we could even enhance this. So not accounts with subscriptions, but for example, we can also then look into how many of these accounts actually do valuable work constantly and create a subset of these things, and then basically push this audience down to, again, like the growth team, to run a specific kind of activation campaign to let these people understand, look, yes, we would love to have you on a subscription because in the end we are a business, we want to make money, but we have these significant benefits for you that once you pay us, we can give you this and we can basically level your game up. And so this is possible when we have the full insight of the data, and also like when we have all the relationship between the different kind of data sets, so like about the subscriptions, about the accounts, how the accounts behave. And this is where for me like the true magic is happening. And so this is what we want to achieve. I hope we now have the insights part covered. And so in the next video, as said before, we will now move to implement everything so that we can achieve this. In the end, we still have to do implementation, of course, but I will show you that in the end, the implementation is less complicated than you might think when you look at this right now. See you in the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to, because in the end, then more people will be aware of this video and it will be more useful to more people. And see you in the next episode.